Hey there, folks. Welcome to kind of a special edition of Broadband News today. I want to cover a topic that I touched on recently because I was going through the new NTIA restructuring policy for BEAD on some things that they changed. And there was a specific thing that when I was looking at it, I was like, you know what, this makes no sense. And as I looked at it, I realized it really effectively means that we don't need BEAD dollars anymore based on what the NTIA has done, because it's not very logical. So I'm going to go through that today. I'm going to make a case for that. If you are watching me today, please feel free to jump in there and make any comments that you'd like to make and or questions. Let me know if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, whatever. Or if you're watching this later, if you're not watching it live, feel free to comment on YouTube on that. So I will be right back and make the case for that. Hey there. Thanks again for joining me. Rick Uzzi here with Decorum with the special edition of Broadband News. And let me be clear that I'm saying this kind of facetiously. I mean, obviously that's not the case, and I do want there to be funding for broadband, but based on the way that the NTIA has restructured this, which is, again, illogical, it really does mean that we don't need broadband at this point. So I'm going to talk about that today. Again, I went through this in more detail a week or so ago. So there's a link to that full video where I looked at everything. I looked at all the different things that I felt were important in the restructuring policy. There's also a link to a couple of things I'm looking at today, the full text from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the full text from the original Notice of Funding Opportunity, as well as the text from the new restructuring policy. So we'll take a look at those things. So I want to just kind of run through the case for this. So the first thing we need to do is look at what is considered unserved and underserved in the Infrastructure Act. So this is from the Act itself. So you see here, unserved location lacks access to reliable broadband service offered with a speed of not less than 23 megabits per second for download and 3 megabits per second for upload, and then latency sufficient to support real-time interactive applications. So it needs to be fairly low latency, and again, anything that's less than 25 by 3 is considered unserved. As far as underserved, if it's 25 by 3 but less than 100 by 20, then it's considered underserved. So those are your two definitions. They're very important in this process because this is what determines whether or not an area, a broadband serviceable location in the United States, should be funded by BEAD dollars. Is it unserved, in which case it was something that we wanted to look at first for providing or aiming broadband dollars towards. That, again, would be anything less than 25 by 3, or is it underserved? And that would be the next step up on importance. And again, that would be less than 100 by 20, but over 25 by 3. So these are very important definitions that are within the Infrastructure Act. And then also from the Act, again from the IIJA, in there they have a term called Priority Broadband Project. And they define it to some extent. So you see here, broadband service that meets speed, latency, reliability, consistency, and quality of service and related criteria as the Assistant Secretary shall determine. Now, that was originally Alan Davidson under the Biden administration. So he determined what that would be. And then and there's a very important end here, which is why I pointed out, and that would ensure that the network built by the project can easily scale speeds over time to meet the evolving connectivity needs of households and businesses, and so to support the deployment of 5G, successor wireless technologies, and other advanced services. So this is what the Assistant Secretary is supposed to take into account when they're considering what a priority broadband project would be. And the way that we'll see, the way that Alan Davidson and the Biden administration determined or defined what a priority broadband project would be. And then we're going to see how the Trump administration, and I would say Howard Lutnick at this point, I don't know if they have an Assistant Secretary at this point, but Howard Lutnick certainly was, I think, making the decisions here, how he interpreted that based on his feelings about broadband funding and the technologies. So again, very important right here, how it's defined in the Act. Very important, this end here. And as I've said in the past, in my opinion, this end does mean that they're talking about something that can scale easily, like fiber. Okay, there's other technologies out there, but fiber certainly meets this to the greatest extent as far as the technology that would meet what you would say would be a priority broadband project. So let's take a look at the original Notice of Funding Opportunity. And again, this would be how the Biden administration and Alan Davidson interprets this. And actually, I'm going to go back because I realized I forgot something here. So there is this term in here that's left vague. Obviously latency, it's vague in the sense that it doesn't, other than the speed you have to meet, it doesn't qualify or quantify what these things are. So it talks about meets the latency requirements, reliability, consistency, and quality of service. So, what is reliability? How do you define that? And you need to determine that if you're going to say, okay, well, which technologies would apply or which technologies would meet this priority broadband project. And reliability is what the Biden administration keyed on when they said, what are the technologies that are going to meet this? So they came up with a definition for reliable broadband service in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And you can see here the term reliable broadband service means broadband service that the broadband data maps, that's the FCC broadband maps, show is accessible to a location. So you've got broadband service that's there, and it's got to be fiber optic technology, cable modem, HFC technology. DSL, surprisingly, they went ahead and included that, even though it's a kind of an obsolete technology at this point. Terrestrial fixed wireless, as long as it was using entirely licensed spectrum or a hybrid of licensed and unlicensed spectrum. So the reasoning behind that was that if it's completely unlicensed spectrum, then you've got the possibility that you could have, nobody has to pay for that spectrum, and it's not limited to one operator. When you're licensing spectrum, it's usually limited to one operator, where one operator has a license in that area to use it. If you've got unlicensed spectrum, then anybody can use it. It's kind of the Wild West. Anybody can say, okay, I'm going to set up my wireless gear right here, and this is free, unlicensed spectrum. I'm going to go ahead and use it. And you have different people doing that and competing, and then you have some contention as far as that spectrum, and you could have interference, those kinds of things. So that's the reason that I think they said entirely licensed. I'm not sure why the hybrid of licensed and unlicensed was there, unless they were talking about something they clarified later, which was CBRS spectrum. And CBRS spectrum, they later qualified as licensed by rule, because with CBRS spectrum, you did have a combination of those two things. You had priority access licenses that operators would license that particular section of the spectrum. And then you had the general access licenses, which anybody could use. Although even there, when people were using that general access licenses, I think that's what it was called, there was contention control on that, because if there was interference, not so much between the operators, but if there was interference with the incumbent operator like the Navy, then whoever was using that spectrum had to back off and pick another slice of that spectrum to do the service. So, but there are licensed portions of CBRS, so they might have been talking about that originally when they were thinking about it. So you see that right there. That's the definition that they have of reliable broadband service. And you notice what's missing, and they clarify later what's missing, that it is not included. So you see here, criteria for reliable broadband service mentions, for the purposes of the BEAD program, locations served exclusively by satellite services using entirely unlicensed spectrum. That's a comma, satellite services. But, locations served exclusively by satellite services using entirely unlicensed spectrum or technology not specified by the commission in this would be considered unserved. So it didn't matter if Starlink or Amazon Kuiper were flying over your head and they could deliver service, let's say, that met the speed and latency requirements. It didn't matter. Those are still considered unserved. So they're still free game for another operator to come in with some other competing technology, assuming that the economics made sense for them and for the state, okay? Because that's the key thing. Because you see here in the third part of this, where it talks about this, it says, if no reliable broadband service technology meeting the BEAD program's technical requirements would be deployable for a subsidy of less than the extremely high cost per location threshold at a given location, so location by location, an eligible entity or the state is authorized to select a proposal involving a less costly technology for that location, even if that technology does not meet the definition of reliable broadband service, but otherwise satisfies the program's technical requirements. In other words, it can be over the 100 by 20 to be able to get you over that from the underserved into the served area. So again, very important here that they're saying, even though we have reliable broadband service, the states have the prerogative to use something that's not that. They do have to get approval, but they can use something else like satellite technology if it meets the technology standards that are laid out in the program. they can do that. So there was, unlike what a lot of people were saying, the states had this ability to do this. There was later guidance put out on how they could, how the program could work with something like satellite, because satellite's very different. You've got satellites over your head right now from Starlink that you could get broadband from. You just need the piece of equipment, the base station. Whereas if you are in an area where you don't have service, you've got satellite, but you don't have anything else like fiber, somebody has to come build that infrastructure. So it's very different. So how do you fund that, right? How do you fund something that's already up there? Well, they had guidance on that as well. So again, this is from the original BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity. Again, I have a link to that, and I've got the pages here I believe I got the pages correct here for where all of these items are. So that's the NOFO as it was. This is also from the NOFO for Priority Broadband Project, and this is where they define what a priority broadband project is. So we saw how it was defined in the Act, and here's where they kind of expand on that. They say the term priority broadband project means a project that will provision service via end-to-end fiber optic facilities to each end user premises. An eligible entity or state may disqualify any project that might otherwise qualify as a priority broadband project from priority broadband project status with the approval of the Assistant Secretary on the basis of the location surpasses the eligible entity's extremely high cost per location threshold, or for other valid reasons subject to approval by the Assistant Secretary. So again, we saw what originally was for a priority broadband project. Let me go back. I guess I'll go back to that, take a look at that again. So priority broadband project, again, this is where it's talking about, it's got to meet speed, reliability. We saw how the NOFO defined reliable broadband service and can evolve over time to meet the needs of households and businesses. That's what's in the Act. What the NOFO added to it was, or interpreted, I should say, was that, okay, if it's going to have to be meeting these speeds and latency, and what has the best speeds out there, fiber, what has the best latency out there, fiber, what's going to meet the needs of households for years, decades to come, not just years to come, but decades to come. As I've said before, fiber today, you can buy 25 gig fiber if you're in an area where somebody offers it. It's very expensive. You probably wouldn't want it, but you can buy it. More and more operators are deploying 25 gig in places, especially those that are kind of doing it for marketing checkbox. Hey, we offer 25 gig. We know you don't want it, but we do. Here's a 1 gig package that you might want, right? GPON, because GPON is kind of the standard right now. And a lot have got XGS PON, that's 10 gig PON cards out there. They can offer 1 gig or 10 gig. So fiber, by far, is the most scalable, the one that is the most future-proof. So again, this is how the Biden administration defined that. That's how they interpreted what was in the Act, and that's how they defined it. And I actually think it was done well. I really do think that they were kind of balancing what the intent of was the Act, in the Act, I believe, and then what we really needed for the future of broadband. Because if we're going to do something with all this money, we want to make sure that we're doing the smart thing and not something stupid, right? And as I said, as we look at this, it really means that we don't need any BEAD money at all anymore based on what the NTIA has done. I'm surprised nobody has come out and said that yet. I am. And if you disagree with me, change my mind, but I don't see why. As we're done with this, I'll make that point. Now, there's something in here, the eligible entity's extremely high cost per location. This is something that was in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. That was a little convoluted. The new guidance took this away. And I think that makes sense what they did there, because really what they were trying to do here with the extremely high cost threshold was they were really trying to tell the state, you need to pick a threshold where anything that is above that, in other words, if you've got whatever that price is, that you're going to say that's the amount that's just too much. Okay, we can't pay. Above this, we need some latitude to deploy something else. They really should have just left it up to the states and said, okay, we're going to leave it up to you. If it's too expensive, you deploy something else, rather than have them try to come up with this threshold and then figure out where that is, and then it's kind of above and below and all that. That was kind of complicated. But that's the point there, is that really the states have the ability to deploy something else. It's just that they had to have this threshold in there. Was really hard to figure out. So it's better, I think, the way it is that the Trump administration did it, which was if it's too much, You can deploy something else. It's just that we have to agree with you. It's basically, it's almost the same thing. It's just like, we have to agree with you. It doesn't have to be this threshold or that threshold. We have to agree with you. But the other thing the Trump administration said was that we think some things are just going to be way too high and you can't do it. We're not going to agree with you, period. I think even if you have enough money to get fiber to every single person in the state, and it's going to cost you $100,000 for the last 5 locations, we're not going to approve that. I think that's where the Trump administration was going with that. Okay, so this is from the original NOFO Priority Broadband Project. Then we've got, this is the new restructuring language on what a priority broadband project is from the Trump administration. So they were not very creative here. What they took was what's in the act as far as the speeds that need to be met in the latency. And they had to keep some language. They had to keep it because it was in the bill. So the term priority broadband project means a project that provides broadband service at speeds of no less than 100 megabits per second for downloads and 20 megabits per second for uploads. Should sound familiar. We just read it out of the act. Has a latency less than or equal to 100 milliseconds. So that's defined there. So it's got to be less than or equal to 100 milliseconds. Satellite can meet that pretty easily. Low Earth orbit satellite can meet that easily. Geosynchronous satellite can't meet that, and also really today can't meet the speeds. And they have to keep this end in there, can easily scale speeds over time to meet the evolving connectivity needs of households and businesses, and support the deployment of 5G successor wireless technologies and other advanced services. And again, this to me, even whether it's in the bill or whether it's in the restructuring language, to me screams fiber. Let's take supporting deployment of 5G and successor wireless technologies. How can something that is slower than 5G support 5G? You can't use it for backhaul effectively. Really, they're talking about fiber there. And certainly, again, with the speeds and evolving over time, they're talking about fiber there. So where is the problem? Why is this a problem? Well, here we go. This is why I think we really, based on the definition, we don't have any need for BEAD any longer. I am looking at a location somewhere in Montana, and I have looked at a bunch of locations all over the broadband map, from Arizona to Montana to Florida to the Florida Keys to Maine to South Dakota. I've looked at all kinds of places. I haven't found one yet. There may be something out there, but they're all pretty much 220 by 30. I think everything I looked at was 220 by 30. So what does that mean? That is over the speed that's required for BEAD. So this could be considered as a technology, right? Because it's over the 100 by 20, it's over the 100 by 20. So under this and what Starlink is reporting here, they would qualify to be able to provide BEAD service. However, it's over the threshold to be able to provide BEAD service. So in other words, it's over 100 by 20. Therefore, this is considered served. You can go in this map and you can pick wireless technology only. And if I picked wireless technology only, all these dots would be red and it would say unserved. Where you see served here, it would say unserved. But when I picked any technology, satellite comes up and it is showing as served now. So by virtue of the FCC's broadband map and the fact that the new priority broadband project says it could be basically any technology, every single location in the United States is served, because this is what Starlink is reporting. Is that really what Starlink can provide? Not really. Okay, they don't consistently get over 100 megabits per second. It's really good service. If you had DSL slow service, if you had slow fixed wireless, if you didn't have anything at all, then you love your satellite service, and it is good. It's, again, it is hovering around 100 megabits per second, sometimes over, sometimes under on the downloads. On the uploads, usually less than 20, rarely, I think, over 20, I believe. So it's really on the cusp of, is this a technology that actually does provide the speeds that would make it eligible as a priority broadband project under the new definition? Because again, it's got to be over 100 by 20, and they're not consistently over that. Most other technologies like cable modem can easily be over that. DSL, again, should not be considered. A lot of fixed wireless could do that, certainly 5G kinds of services, and certainly fiber is the one, again, that takes it. So And as you look here, you see there's an unlicensed fixed wireless, but they're 32 by 32, so they're not even close. So in this particular area, here are your choices if you lived here. You can get Starlink, and if you have Starlink, like I said, you are probably thrilled, because before Starlink came out, what you were limited to was your geosynchronous satellite, which is not really that fast and probably not this fast, and has pretty long latencies, because you're talking about a satellite that's tens of thousands of miles up versus a couple of hundred miles up, 200-300 miles up. So you had that with these fixed geosynchronous satellites versus near Earth orbit satellites, and you had this unlicensed fixed wireless. So if you have Starlink here, you're thrilled. But do you want to keep it forever? Would you want it 5 years down the road when technology has surpassed where it is today, and suddenly you're finding that on Starlink the things that you're wanting to do are slow because it's augmented reality, virtual reality, whatever else doesn't support what you want to do? That's the problem that we would have if we went in this area and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and let Starlink be what we're going to fund. And again, I want to emphasize the point that based on this, we can't fund this location. This is served. You go to the broadband map, you select any technology, and every single dot on the map, as far as I know, is going to be green. Because as far as I know, Starlink everywhere is saying that they do 220 by 30. So you see a problem there? I see a problem there. That means we're fully funded with broadband under the new guidance, and there's no need for any broadband funding to go out the door. I obviously don't agree with that, but basically that's the logic of this if you look at it. And what's funny here is that if Starlink said, oh, you know what, that we don't actually do that. Why don't we report what we do? And let's say they had to do something like they reported what most people are getting, and let's say it was 100 by 10. That doesn't meet it. And if that doesn't meet it, then it doesn't qualify. Then this area would be unserved, and you could put something else out here, but you couldn't put satellite out here because it wouldn't qualify. So you see that it's kind of a catch-22 there for them. So that's the problem. So just kind of to recap, what's wrong here? So we've got what they did. They removed the reliable broadband definition that excluded satellite from being considered for most deployments. And yet satellite basically now says that it covers the whole country. They changed the definition of a priority broadband project to remove the requirement for end-to-end fiber. So before, that made sense because it was a priority broadband project. Well, if everything is a priority broadband project, then nothing's a priority. It's kind of like in The Incredibles when Syndrome says, when everyone's super, no one will be. Well, it's kind of like this. If everything's priority, then nothing's a priority. Why would satellite be a priority broadband project? That would say that every single location in the country is a priority broadband project. But then again, every single location is covered, so we don't need it anyway. So that's why it's completely illogical. Any technology will do if it supports 100 by 20 or better. The scalability requirement remains, though. So I think I know what they were trying to do. They were trying to, it was a different administration. It was a Democrat administration. This is a Republican administration coming in that's saying, we don't like wasting money. I don't like wasting money either. But I also don't like being illogical because you don't agree. I don't like the not invented here thing. If I came in and I saw, well, this is good, I'm going to keep this, and I saw this is bad, I'm going to get rid of this, that makes sense. But if you're just going to say, you know what, we're just going to completely rip everything out, didn't make any sense, they wasted 3 years, they didn't completely waste it. There was a lot of stuff that they took out that was good. A lot of the regulations, red tape was good. There were things in there that could have been done better, but I think methodically going through, making sure that the broadband maps were as correct as possible before they started sending out funding, could have done things a little bit quicker, but those kinds of things were good. So coming in and changing all this where it doesn't make any sense now is not a good idea. So here, again, any technology will do. It doesn't matter as long as it's at 100 by 20. The scalability requirement is there. So again, what I think they were trying to get done was they had to put that in there anyway. They had to leave that in there. It's in the act. But I think what they're trying to do is say, there was too much of a preference for fiber. We're not gonna put the scale on for fiber. Well, it's a priority. You need to put the scale on for something. The priority stuff. Let's get the priority projects done with fiber. Then we've got Starlink again reports 200 by 30 nationally, which means every location in the U.S. is served. And BSLs that are served over 100 by 20 don't qualify for BEAD funding. So That means if every location in the United States is served, and if that, if it's over 100 by 20, they don't qualify for BEAD funding. So there's my case. Makes sense to me. Surprised nobody's brought this up. So what does this mean for, what does this mean moving forward? How do they do this? Well, what the administration has said, in the new structuring, and again, there's a link down there where I did a video that I kind of walked through more of the items about the restructuring and what states are going to have to do. But each state has to have another round now. If they already finished all their application rounds, they've got to do one more that they're calling the benefit of the bargain round, because that was a favorite phrase of Howard Lutnick in his testimonies before Congress that when he was talking about this. So they've got to do one more round where they've got to consider every technology. And for some states, they might have considered every technology in their rounds, but they've still got to do another one. For Georgia, for example, I know here where I am, their first round, they've done one round. Their first round was supposed to be for county by county. So if you're going to bid, you had to bid for the whole county, and it had to be fiber. If you wanted to bid something other than fiber, you had to wait for a second round, and then they'd see if there was anything left. They'd see if there were any areas left. They'd see if there were any technologies that would fit that. Well, they have to now do another round, so they're going to have to do this other round and include everything. They were probably going to have to do another round anyway. But, for example, they might have had several counties. I would think a lot of counties where they were kind of settled on, we can do fiber here, everything looks good. They're now going to have to let other people bid. And then what do they do? So if they had fiber before, now what do they do with satellite? Again, satellite, it's already up there. It's supposedly already at a speed that is fast enough where you can't fund that location. What do they do? If they want to use it, if they want to use fiber, how do they make the case that, we want to use fiber because according to Priority Broadband Project, we feel like this is what's going to scale to meet needs of households and businesses throughout the future. I think that's what states are going to have to do, is try to make the case that, despite this new language and despite the fact that we have considered every technology, there are a majority of places where we feel we need to deploy fiber. And there are areas where we would we're going to consider other technologies like fixed wireless. That would probably be their first technology that they would want to consider would be fixed wireless, because that's going to grow, and that's going to grow more easily, let's say, than satellites, where you've got to launch satellites. Those satellites, I don't know if you realize this, the life of a satellite that's up there for Starlink right now is 5 years. Okay, so he launches a bunch of satellites in a constellation. They're circling around there. The effective life of them is 5 years. Now, it may be you leave up there longer than 5 years. It's like if you have a piece of equipment in a back room in your company, the effective life might be 3 years. After that, it's end of life, and it's time to maybe get something new. But if you've got redundant equipment, or if it's not that important, you might leave it up there for a while. You leave it running, and then if it dies, again, if it's redundant, especially if you've got other equipment you can throw in there, you don't necessarily replace it right at 3 years. So maybe they don't start deorbiting satellites at 5 years, but they're going to have to start deorbiting these things and replacing them on an ongoing basis. So it's a tricky technology compared to, let's say, fixed wireless and certainly fiber. Fiber, once you get the fiber in the ground or up on a pole, you're good for a really, really long time. It's not, it's pretty resilient. And then also the technology, as it evolves, you don't need to be changing out the fiber. So as we've seen, we've got GPON cards that you could put in. You could do gigabit PON. Okay, then we had XGS PON. You could do 10 gig PON. Now we've got 25 gig PON, and you're not having to change out the fiber. You've just got to change. A lot of times you could use the same equipment you've got and just change out the card that's in there. Change out the card that's got the lasers, I think, that shoot the light down the fiber. So it's really the way that we want to go. So my last question based on this is, again, what was the intent of Congress? If the intent of Congress was that satellite was fine, and maybe they didn't realize back then that, satellite can do a little bit better than 100 by 20, so maybe we're good. I don't think they were thinking that. They're thinking, we have a lot of areas in the country that don't have good broadband. And when I say don't have good broadband, we talked about what they were considering. Is it less than 25 by 3? That's really bad. We're going to call it unserved. It's so bad it's not even served at all. Then we've got underserved, less than 100 by 20, but better than 25 by 3. So we'll call that underserved. So they were wanting to deploy broadband that was going to do better than that, but not just better than that. I think a lot better than that. If we're going to be spending all this money we're going to be prioritizing certain locations with broadband. We're not going to want to do it with a technology that's not going to be much better than it is today, 10 years down the road, let's say. And that's, again, constantly needing to be refreshed with new satellites and those kinds of things. It's a great technology. Don't get me wrong. I think satellite's great. I think those people that can get it today, it's great in those areas that are, you've got homes here and there that there's no other option. And again, they're thrilled to have it. But the more people that get fiber in some of these diverse locations, the less need there's going to be for satellite, because people are going to have a much, much better technology. But there's still going to be a place for that. There's still going to be a place for fixed wireless. That was all covered under the original notice of funding opportunity. There were plenty of options and flexibility for the states to choose who could have what technology, whether they're going to do fiber most everywhere and fixed wireless everywhere else, whether they're going to use some satellite. That was all, they all had that leeway. The most difficult part was the extremely high cost per location threshold that they had to try to figure out. I'm glad that's gone. So maybe this all works out. Maybe we'll have to see when the states start re-putting in their proposals what the Trump administration does as far as based, where they see fiber. What are they going to consider is not an unreasonable amount? Letnick kind of gave some hints in his most recent congressional hearing where he was answering some questions about BEAD. I think he did use the figure like a couple of locations in one state where it was $100,000 to reach one location. Okay, maybe that's unreasonable. So maybe right there, even if you have the money, even if the government handed you all this money, maybe you shouldn't be wasting it $100,000 per location. Maybe you can do something better there. I'm hoping they take that tactic and let them do fiber most everywhere else where it makes sense. See, I got Conway Fan 98 here. County recently announced $23 million in private investment in deploying fiber broadband to around half the county. The other half is expected to be served through RDOF and BEAD. But you're very much in doubt that BEAD will serve the other half under the new rules. We'll have to see. Not even sure what's going on with RDOF. I've seen nothing but pole inspections for 3 years. Yeah, RDOF, somebody else just, forget who it was, somebody else just defaulted on a bunch of locations. I think it's more defaults for them. So that's the problem with RDOF has been, the program wasn't very good because it allowed the operators to low bid in places, and they did not take, it was Lumen. They did not take into account inflation, which there wasn't inflation. I mean, inflation was pretty steady for years and years. So they were taking it, I think, into account the best possible scenario. And of course, we were hit with the pandemic, which boosted inflation, some other factors in there. And then some people defaulted even before any of that happened because, again, they were looking at a whole bunch of money and saying, wow, we need a piece of this. So they underbid, and then they kind of were the dog that caught the car, didn't know what to do with it. So a lot of them decided they were going to have to default on those. So RDOF is kind of up in the air. And then the other thing that happened to RDOF, obviously, is RDOF was out there, all that money was out there, and then because of the pandemic, the BEAD funding came out. So you had RDOF already that a lot had not been done on that, and then suddenly we got BEAD out there with a whole bunch more money that was being handled totally differently. So BEAD had the right, I think BEAD made some good changes as far as some of the mistakes with RDOF, the biggest being that you had the federal government was in charge of the money like they were with RDOF, but they were handing it over to the states and letting the states determine how best to spend that. And some of that has been pulled back a little bit with what the Trump administration is trying to do. It sounds like they're trying to have a little more control in there, again, on what the states do. But if you look at something like ARPA, the funding that came out related to the pandemic, that was the American Rescue Plan Act. And there was lots of money, 450 billion in one of the programs and 10 billion in another. 10 billion was for a capital projects fund, I think was going to things like broadband, but they could take that other, state and local fiscal recovery funds, like 450 billion. And a lot of states, like my state in Georgia, applied a big chunk, if not all of that money, to broadband. So a lot of states reduced quite a bit the number of unserved locations in their area using that funding. And there were far fewer things that had to be done with that. The state handled the subgranting process. There weren't all these rules. That money was sent out. I think it was much more efficient. So BEAD could have been done more like that. The Biden administration definitely put way too many regulations, and I think we're maybe being very, very cautious because of RDOF on what they were trying to do with the BEAD program. And again, put a lot of stuff in there that didn't need to be in there. So that stuff's been fixed as well. So that's the good news. The bad news is it's now really kind of confusing what the states are going to have to do after this other application, and how are they going to handle the technology in there, whether it's fiber. So I appreciate you joining me today, folks. And again, if you have any, after this is over, if you're watching this, if you have any comments, go ahead and comment on YouTube and let me know what you think about my theory here that we really don't need BEAD funding anymore. Obviously, I don't truly believe that, because I know that we're going to get the money out. Howard Lutnick said it's going to be going to the states before the end of the year. So it's happening, but I still question, because of the illogical nature of what they did here, how that all makes sense. And just a final, again, what's going on with this is 3 months. The states have 3 months basically to get this additional round of applications done. And then, as Howard Lutnick said, the NTIA has 3 months to get all those applications in and or approved or feedback, to get everything done so that money starts going out before the end of the year. So they're trying to accelerate what has been a long, lengthy process. But they forget that a lot had to happen before they ever got here, because he's saying they wasted 3 years. No, they didn't. There was a lot that had to happen, including getting the broadband maps done before we got to this point. So thanks again for joining me. If you like this, go ahead and click the like button there on YouTube. And if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, and you will be subscribed to the channel. Make sure that you ring the bell and you'll be notified when I'm live. I appreciate you joining me today. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.